How we doing, guys? This is Mr. Striz, and I'm checking in for that third biology review here. Today we're going to look at our biochem, some enzymes, and then also we're going to talk about our organelles and cell transport. But let's first talk about our macromolecules. Remember, macro meaning large molecules here. And there's four types of macromolecules: lipids, carbs, proteins, and nucleic acid. Now, remember, carbs, an easy way to look at a carb or to notice a carb if it's OSE, like cellulose or fructose. Anything OSE is going to be carbohydrates. Those examples include bread, rice, potatoes. Remember, carbs are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Its monomer is a monosaccharide, and it stores short-term energy. Now, moving on to lipids. Remember, lipids are fats and oils composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. That monomer is fatty acids and glycerol. And remember, lipids stores long-term energy. So think of the L for long-term, for the L for lipids. So L for L, lipids, long-term energy. Now, moving on to our last two. We had nucleic acid. Remember, nucleic acid is DNA or RNA with that Na, giving that example there for nucleic acid. It's composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and phosphorus. So that phosphorus stands out there with nucleic acid. Its monomer is nucleotides, and it stores and transmits hereditary information. That's where that DNA comes from. Proteins, examples chicken, beef, or fish, any type of meat, anything like that. Remember, proteins are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Its monomer is amino acids, and it controls the rate of reactions and regulates cell processes. And we're actually going to get into that proteins, a little bit more into proteins with the enzymes here. So remember, enzymes, anything that ends with ASE, you can tell right away that's enzyme like catalyst. And remember, enzymes are proteins that speed up chemical reactions by lowering the activation energy needed. Remember that activation energy is the amount of energy needed to start a chemical reaction. We talked about three factors that affect enzyme activity. Remember, pH, that's how acidic or basic something is. Temperature and concentration. Temperature is just obviously the temperature. Concentration is the amount of that substance. Remember, enzymes have optimal levels they work best at. If they are in a level they don't work at, remember, those become inactive. They don't work as well like they're supposed to. Now, remember this picture here. So this is a chemical reaction. Remember, without an enzyme, the activation energy has to go all the way up here. With the enzyme, the activation is actually lowered here. But remember, on the test, I know we struggled with it, where it doesn't lower the reactants and the products. It just lowers that activation from here to here. So if you ever see that graph again on your test, maybe the EOC or even your midterm, just notice it just lowers it from the activation at the top to the activation down here when you have the enzyme. Now, moving on, we just talked about recently. The first thing we talked about, prokaryotes. All right, remember prokaryotes? The example for prokaryote is bacteria. The eukaryote, that's like a plant or animal cell. And I kind of just gave you a T-chart there to kind of review it. Remember, the big thing, prokaryotes have no nucleus, where eukaryotes do. Prokaryotes also have no membrane-bound organelles, and their DNA is found in a nucleoid region. Whereas eukaryotes are unicellular or multicellular, they have a nucleus and they have membrane-bound organelles. But both have cell membrane, they both have cytoplasm, ribosomes, and DNA. So remember this cell right here, that prokaryote's a bacteria as an example. This one's an animal. Remember, plant cells have more of a square shape there. But moving on to plant and animal, I just printed out a picture so I didn't have to draw because, my drawings are terrible. But moving on, once again, I gave you a T-chart. Remember that animal cell is more of a circular cell there, whereas a plant cell is more of a square. Remember, animals just have a vacuole. Remember, it's a smaller vacuole, whereas plant cells have a large central vacuole. Remember that cell wall and chloroplast are the other two organelles found within plants only. And I gave you a list of what they both have as well down in the middle. Now, for those organelles, I didn't write out the functions because we had that sheet that we played Kahoot with. So use that sheet there to get through the functions of the organelles. Make sure you go over those and include those in the study guide because that'll help you out a lot. As organelles, you'll see a lot on your midterm there. And then finally, we talked about transport, cell transport. So remember, if we talk about going to a high to low concentration, that's a type of passive transport. Remember, passive transport does not require energy. And some examples there are diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. Remember, diffusion is small molecules entering the cell. Facilitated diffusion, remember, its larger molecules, they need help from the protein channels. All right, so I know we struggle with that on the tests. Facilitated diffusion needs help from protein channels. And osmosis, remember, osmosis is only the movement of water across the cell membrane, so that once again, only water there. And we broke it down, osmosis, into 3 different types. You got isotonic, which has equal amount of water as the cell, hypotonic, more water inside the cell than outside, and hypertonic, more solution outside the cell than water inside the cell. And then finally, remember that low to high concentration there, that's active transport. Remember, active transport requires energy. That's the big difference between active and passive, is that active transport needs ATP, passive transport does not. And remember, passive, high to low, active, low to high. Thank you.